No Jim Knowles for OU.
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Sooner Nation? Welcome to Locked On Sooners, and thank you for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. Shout out to all the everydayers out there. Tune in and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Super Bowl 59 is here, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. He's Jay Smith. I'm John Williams. The Oklahoma Sooners made a play for Jim Knowles, the Ohio State defensive coordinator, but it looks like Ohio State is losing him, but it's to their Big Ten rival, Penn State. Jay, this is a little bit of a surprising twist, but as we talked about on Friday, this thing could have been heading in any direction.
Yeah, and it's not a situation where Oklahoma truly lost out. We felt like this was a long shot from the beginning. Just the fact that they actually would swing for the fences in the situation, to me, is pretty positive optics that they would actually make that attempt, because we all know that Brent Venables' goal is to get to the point where he's more of the CEO role and he can oversee two coordinators leading their sides of the team. And, you know, contrary to popular belief, Jim Knowles runs a similar type defense that Brent Venables wants to run, and more of a 4-2-5 type multiple where you'll have a Cheeto or an additional DB, but they're bringing more four-man fronts out because that's how you attract defensive linemen to your school. Those three-man fronts really hinder you on recruiting, and as much as I love Zach Alley, that's what he ran at Jacksonville State, more of a 3-3-5 set with multiple safeties. And he'll get to do that at West Virginia, whereas here, we need more four-man front. So not getting Jim Knowles is not a massive loss. It's just been a great thing of icing to go on top of our cake.
Yeah, it's one of those situations where you weren't necessarily looking to make a big splash as a defensive coordinator. I mean, when Brent Venables came, who did he bring with him? Ted Roof. And then he went with Zach Alley. You know, and so it was guys that either were a veteran defensive coordinator that could install Brent Venables' vision, or a young up-and-comer who Brent Venables was familiar with. He wasn't necessarily looking to go out there and get the number one defensive coordinator in the country, because Brent Venables is kind of that guy also. So do you need to go and add that kind of guy? And so, yeah, it would have been great to have Jim Knowles. It would have freed up Brent Venables to not have to look over the defensive coordinator's shoulder to make sure that what they were going to do was to his liking, because no matter how much of a CEO head coach you are, if your expertise is on the defensive side of the ball, a la Nick Saban, there's no way you're not going to be at least aware of what's going on in the defensive room and what the scheme is going to be calling, the game plan is going to be for that week. So, but this would have allowed him to take a further step back than maybe what he had under Ted Roof and with Zach Alley, because Jim Knowles is arguably the best defensive coordinator in college football right now. And really, I don't even think there's much of an argument, because he's got the stats and he's got the national title to prove it.
Yeah, the goal is to not that he doesn't want to be involved on the defense. The goal is to be able to be like a CEO and really only step in when you really need to. Just as you mentioned, John, perfect example. Nick Saban was infamous for his team, the coordinators would do the game planning, but he had the last right of refusal on plays. Sometimes he would step in and interject and say, no, we shouldn't do this. We need to do that instead. I mean, we all are aware of the infamous arguments and, screaming fest that he had at Lane Kiffin on the sideline for doing stupid, boneheaded stuff. And that's probably what Venables wants to get to, especially the way that things are getting more complex in college football, just in general, with all the changes that's coming down the line. So the hope would have been for Brent Venables to step back and be able to really assess things and be able to only chime in where really needed, and honestly focus on that game management component to make sure that's good. Now, I know that was one thing that we've had our questions about, but the good thing is that The one major concern that Oklahoma had, we feel like we have addressed that with Ben Arbuckle coming in as offensive coordinator and him bringing a quarterback in John Mateer. So you got a quarterback that's running his offense. You've got a new offensive set and a guy that seems like he actually knows what he's doing when it comes to time management. We'll see once we get into actual games, but going back and watching some of their film, it kind of feels like Ben has a good handle on the way the game should run. So game management wise, things should be better with Ben in there and having that quarterback. So that's fixing that one piece. But the question now is, what's next for Oklahoma? What should they do going forward? What should Brent Venables consider now that we are completely out of the Jim Knowles sweepstakes?
Well, we know that they're looking at guys to install as the defensive coordinator, but to me, it's Brent Venables' show. Like he's going to be the guy that's your defensive play caller. So no matter who you put in with the title of defensive coordinator, and in fact, you've already got a couple guys with the co-defensive coordinator title on your staff as it is, whoever you put in there as your quote unquote linebackers coach and defensive coordinator, to me, Brent Venables needs to just take control of the defense.
Yeah.
And I have no problem with that. I understand that there are some concerns about the game management aspect, which you just alluded to. At the same time, this is a make or break season for Brent Venables. It's a season he has to have a lot of success. And so I do not mind my defensive-minded head coach, who has been considered one of the best defensive coordinators of the last 25 years, being fully invested on that side of the ball and allowing Ben Arbuckle the room, the space to operate on the offensive side, and then letting your defensive staff be the guys making those adjustments on the sidelines, talking to the dudes on the sidelines, going through the iPad and figuring out what adjustments need to be made between drives as Brent Venables is watching what the offense is doing and making sure that, hey, if there's a timeout that needs to be called, he's calling it. If there's, a situational game or a game situation like, hey, it's a fourth down. Are we going? Yeah, we're going. He can be aware of those things. So I understand, but I do understand people's hesitancy to having him be the head coach and the defensive play caller, but you see it across college football. Guys like Lincoln Riley and Steve Sarkisian, they stay calling. Lane Kiffin stay calling their plays. Now it's offense versus defense. It's a little bit different, but it can work too. So I'm not completely out on the idea. I think Brent Venables, again, he's a really good defensive play caller. He's a really good defensive coordinator. It's just going to be a little bit different than maybe what he had anticipated doing this year. And honestly, maybe he was going to go that way anyway.
Right.
And the Jim Knowles thing just kind of fell into their lap. And so they had to consider it. They had to pursue it. It didn't go that way. Well, now they're back to where they started, which was Brent Venables likely taking over as the defensive play caller.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, as you mentioned, offensive side's a little bit easier because it also encompasses the game management component. Like you're focused on running the game while at the same time calling the plays because your goal is to control the clock on the offensive side of the ball, whereas on the defensive side of the ball, your goal is to get off the field as fast as possible. So on defense, where the struggle comes in, especially for someone like a Brent Venables, is they're trying to prepare themselves for what the other team's going to do on offense, while he also has to pay attention to his current offense and make sure the offense is getting stuff together. If he was running it on the offensive side of the ball, he's not that concerned about his defense doing what they're doing. He can still focus on game planning for the next possession while his defensive staff is doing their thing and calling timeouts only when they feel like they can't get the call out there fast enough. So it's a little bit different when it comes to management on one side to the other. But as you alluded, you've got people that are running the co. So you should be okay. I guess my question is going to be, who's going to be the one up in the booth that's actually looking down? Because that's what Jim Knowles does at Ohio State. Mm-hmm. He's always in the booth watching the all 22 view so he can be able to call the proper plays. Brent Venables is going to need somebody up there doing something similar to be able to give them a little bit of an advantage. Maybe you can, get an analyst that you like to get up there to be able to do that or view it. Maybe Brandon Hall goes up there. You can talk him into it. He may not call the plays, but have him up there to leverage his eyes to help with everything.
Wes Goodwin.
I mean, if they can get Wes Goodwin on staff, it sounds like there's potential for him to come around. that's what we're going to look at. So we may need to look at also some potential prospects for the position. That'll be a fun topic to talk about sometime this week. But to be honest, one name I've been talking about over the last couple of weeks, just slightly over on my channel, has been Brian Odom, the former linebacker coach here. He's down there at North Texas. He's an interim DC/linebacker coach. The linebackers we have on staff now, on the team now, most of them was recruited by him. Don't think it'll hurt to have a reunion with him coming back. Maybe the players will be excited to see him again, and he could bring some talent with him because he's a really good recruiter, John. I think that's a good idea.
I think it's a great idea. It makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. Another interesting idea happened over the weekend. The Oklahoma Sooners offered another quarterback for the 2026 recruiting class. Let's discuss coming up next here on Locked On Sooners. This is a message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. All so you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now this is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service, real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Thanks again for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. Shout out to all the everydayers out there. Tune in and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. We're free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Jay, the Oklahoma Sooners went back into the quarterback market for the 2026 recruiting class, offered four-star prospect Bo Bentley out of Salina, Texas. My man combined for 63 total touchdowns for a 16-0 4A state championship team.
Oh, wow.
And apparently blew it up at the Navy All-American Bowl.
Well, there you go. There you have it. He goes to the Navy All-American Bowl and shows up and shows out. Then, of course, you need to go ahead and make an offer. No, it sounds like Oklahoma is trying to prepare themselves for next season and a possibility of having a semi-empty room. We all know that Jaden O'Neil is the cornerstone of the 26 class, and he is the focal point. He is the one that they expect to be the leader coming in here. I know Ben Arbuckle likes him. They had good conversations. And I know that Brent Venables just adores the O'Neil camp as well as Jaden O'Neil himself. The unfortunate thing is that the climate that college football is today is there's a very good chance that quarterbacks decide to leave early and often. Like, for example, John, if you look at the room now, you have John Mateer, you have Michael Hawkins, who most likely will redshirt. You brought in Cole Gonzalez, the FCS quarterback, who lit it up down there and actually is a pretty solid quarterback. I'm not saying that he's going to win you a Heisman, but he's someone that could probably come in a great reserve role. And you got Jet New, who is the true freshman that's part of the 25 class. Well, one of the problems you run into is if John Mateer is exactly what we expect him to be and he replicates what he did last season, there's a very good chance that he could be pushed out and go into the NFL because that draft class today does not look very impressive when it comes to quarterbacks at all. And so if that's the case, you lose John Mateer quarterback. Michael Hawkins is going to be there. You bring in Jaden O'Neil because Cole Gonzalez graduates, and that leaves O'Neil, Hawkins, and Jet New. Now, there's always a possibility to go out there into the portal and pick up another quarterback, but that's not always the easiest because you got to convince somebody to come in when there's two quarterbacks, maybe three, that potentially will start over you, and there's not really a path to play. That's why Brendan Zurbrugg hit the portal. There wasn't a path for him to get on the field. If you bring in a 26 classman, at least they'll give it a 1 year, good old boy shot. Because if Jet New also sees that there's no path into the play and he decides that, you know what? If I go back home to Utah, BYU, and Mike can play, he may bounce. That leaves you with two quarterbacks. You got to prepare yourself just in case for the long run. And I feel like this is probably the safest route for them to go is to grab someone in the class of 26.
Yeah, I know a lot of people are going to be jumping to conclusions and wondering and worrying about what this means for Jaden O'Neil. Jaden O'Neil was just on campus this past weekend, still hobnobbing with the coaching staff, still recruiting, peer recruiting with a lot of guys in the 2026 class. So I'm not too concerned about that. I think this is a dude that's locked in with Oklahoma. Until he tells me otherwise, I'm not concerned about Jaden O'Neil. We've seen Oklahoma just in the 2024 recruiting class, Michael Hawkins, Brendan Zerbrook, they brought in 2 quarterbacks. Bringing in Brendan Zerbrook did not affect or impact Michael Hawkins one bit. He said he was cool with it. He was fine with it. He welcomed the competition. And 1 year later, Brendan Zerbrook goes into the portal. I'm not saying that would be the case between Jaden O'Neil and Bo Bentley, but as you mentioned, man, you've kind of got to have these contingency plans available because you never know what's going to happen. You don't know if an injury is going to happen. You don't know what the developmental timeline is going to look like for different guys. I mean, if John Mateer is a one and done at Oklahoma and Michael Hawkins has a great year following him, he could be a 1 year starter and then done. So you never know what the quarterback timeline is going to look like. And so I like the idea that they're going to go and they're going to offer this kid. He had, glowing things to say about, getting the Oklahoma offer. He told Steve Wiltfong, "This is huge for me, being a childhood dream. Coach Arbuckle has really caught my eye and his plans for the offense." What's really fascinating about Bo Bentley is, he had some pretty good offers before, January of this year, but the most significant ones were Ole Miss, Texas A&M, Duke.
SEC.
That's about it. But then goes to the Navy All-American Bowl, and then what comes after that? You get Wisconsin, Kansas State, UCF, Oklahoma, Missouri, Oklahoma State, Virginia Tech, and Florida State. And those last 5 or 6 offers all came in the last week.
Yep.
So the dude's projections and his kind of star status are starting to take off. And this is just kind of the beginning of his reemergence in the recruiting cycle. But again, I think it's a good idea, and I think it's a good idea to plan for the potential that you might only have 2 quarterbacks in 2026, and you need to have plans in place, and you just need to have quarterbacks on the roster just to run practices. So I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, you got to have guys that are going to be good as far as your scout team too as well. You can't just have you don't want to go get bad quarterbacks just to say you have them on roster. You want dudes that if they have to play, they'll play. Or you throw them on the scout team. They can go out there and cause problems so the defense can actually sharpen up. Iron sharpens iron. But this makes me think about Alabama in 2023. I thought this was kind of weird that they went out there. They got Eli Holstein as well as Dylan Lonergan, who were both top 200 quarterbacks. Lonergan was number 13 in the country at the time, and Eli Holstein was 7 in the country at the time. And you're like, oh, wow, you got 2 top 15 quarterbacks in the same class. Why would you do that? But it made sense at the time because they were losing quarterbacks and they needed to start to replenish and make sure they had somebody in the stable. Well, of course, both of them ended up transferring out, but that wasn't because, that was because, Nick Saban decided to throw the deuces on them. It just ruined everything. But if Saban had stuck around, they would have had themselves a little bit more depth, and one of those 2 would have went ahead and left anyway, because that's kind of how it works in the NIL era. If the quarterback's good enough, look at what happened to Penn State. Mm-hmm. Drew Aller just decided to come back, and then their backup, Bo Prabula, decided that he's out, took a whole bunch of money, went to Missouri. We don't even know what he's going to be, but hey, he's now in Missouri, and Missouri's most recent recruit, I think he tore up his ankle or his knee. And so he's done for a full 12 months. So we have no clue what he's going to look like when he comes back. But that's something that happens. You got to prepare yourself. Just as you said, you don't never know. An injury could happen in camp. An injury, knock on wood, it doesn't. But an injury could happen during the season. Whatever. You got to make sure that you have enough dudes in the stable just in case. So I know some fans are a little nervous about the Jaden O'Neil piece. Does it mean that he's not going to be at Oak? No. I think that they're fine. They may go ahead and open things up and accept more calls just in case, because they may have questions if, Ben Arbuckle is sold on them. But, truth be told, we know he's the cornerstone. The goal here at Oklahoma is this dude is going to be the one that's going to bring in the players around him, and he's going to ball out. It's just you got to have bodies just in case.
Yeah, and I look at Jaden O'Neil and being on campus this weekend. I think it assuaged some of my worries or concerns. Just seeing him posing and, meeting and greeting with local products, with Kaydin Jones, with Mason James, who we'll talk about here in a minute, but making sure to develop relationships with those blue chip in-state kids that are heavy Oklahoma leans, maybe. I think that is a telling sign as to where his head's at. He's still building for Oklahoma. And this is going to be one of those kids that everybody's going to be trying to pull away from Oklahoma. Like Jaden O'Neil is that dude. Like he is that good of a player. And so don't go into this thing naive thinking that people aren't going to be making overtures. You're going to have West Coast teams. You're going to have teams across the country trying to get Jaden O'Neil pried away from Oklahoma and Ben Arbuckle. I'm just here to say I'm not worrying about it unless Jaden O'Neil says I'm decommitting and now that's reason to worry. I'm not worried about it one bit. I think it's going to be just fine.
I think if the thing that will jump out to me is if Oklahoma makes a offer to a top 100 quarterback. If one of these top quarterbacks in the country, they make an offer to, and they decide to, make a visit and plan for a visit, then at that point I'd be like, okay, there may be a chance that this is not a Jaden O'Neil, that Jaden O'Neil may not be in the plans. I'll put it that way. But the way this looks, getting Bo as an offer. I went through and looked at all the offers that they've given over the last few. They haven't given a single offer to anybody of note outside of Jaden O'Neil since Jaden O'Neil has committed. So I don't think that that's something to be concerned about. But at the same time, if they do offer someone that's top 100, then that tells me Ben is really out there going fishing.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see how it all transpires. We've got a full year of the 2026 cycle to break down. We'll continue to talk about these 2026 kids coming up next here on Locked On Sooners.
Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling an MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action with live betting all game long. You can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. Right now, the Kansas City Chiefs Philadelphia Eagles will be playing, and it looks like the Chiefs are a -1.5 point favorite. You may want to get on the action in that. If you place a $5 bet, you could potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl. Honestly, it's icing for the cake if you hit that. So download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5 and you'll win. And if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. It's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, the official sports partner of Super Bowl 59.
Thanks again for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. Shout out to all the everydayers. Want to give a special shout out to Henry, who I got to meet on Sunday, just bouncing around town. He said, nice. Hey, are you John Williams, Locked On Sooners? Listen to you every day. So, Henry, shout out to
everydayers, baby.
Out to the family. If you see us out and about, please say hello. We love meeting you guys. It's always nice to put a face to some of the YouTube comments and Twitter reactions and things like that. So, and Henry, thanks for saying something. It was good to meet you, man, and talk some ball with you on Sunday. Jay, there's a lot of ball being talked in Norman over the weekend as Oklahoma hosted a bunch of 2026 kids. There were several from in-state: Taj Overton, Mason James, Kaydin Jones. Who do you want to talk about first? What is your inclination as to where Oklahoma's going in this 2026 class?
Let's start with those local kids. You mentioned this, that Jaden O'Neil had a picture with a couple of the local guys that I know that he's been recruiting himself extremely tough. Kaydin Jones out of Jinx, Oklahoma, as well as Mason James. They're at Norman North. Mason James, a 6-foot wide receiver, 4-star, top 200 player in the country. Definitely excited about him and Kaydin Jones. You know, Kaydin Jones is the son of Kewan Jones, who played running back in the early 2000s, played at Nathan Hale High School as well as Jinx. And so Kaydin followed his pops, lineage, left from Broken Arrow, went over to Jinx, and he's been balling out. So I'm excited at the idea that Jaden O'Neil can come in here, pull some of these OK preps with him, and keep that pipeline going. Our goal has always been, and we've talked about this with Brent Venables, and that's the thing I appreciate the most about him and his staff is they go after local players. They're trying their hardest to keep the good local players here. Not the transplants. I don't think they really jump too much on the transplants, but they really focus on the homegrown talent and make them a priority. And I think Kaydin Jones is definitely one of them. Same thing with Mason James.
Yeah, it's going to be a Oklahoma heavy because you've got a guy like Taj Overton, who is a 4-star prospect. He's got good size. He's just one of those dudes that you want to add to your defensive line. He can play both a nose tackle. He can play a three technique and under tackle position for Oklahoma. And I mean, the dude's just got the ability to win in a lot of ways. Kaydin Jones, that's another guy that's got the ability to win in a lot of ways. He can run hard. He's got great speed, great agility, great quickness. He can win in the passing game. He can be a good kick returner for you. And then Mason James. If I got to see another Norman kid go ball somewhere else for some Big 12 school, I will lose my mind after what Charlie Kohler did to us back at Iowa State. So no, that's just another one of those that you've got to get. I mean, and I feel good about where Oklahoma is going to end up in the recruiting class, but if you can get Mason James to add to your wide receiver room, that's a really productive player that is able to make some big time plays. And then obviously with Kaydin Jones and with Taj Overton, the Taj Overton piece is just continuing to fill your defensive line with big time talent. Yeah. You can add him after you added David Stone and then Trent Wilson, and then go back to Oklahoma prep for a guy like Taj Overton. That gives you 3 straight recruiting classes with big time defensive tackle prospects that can be big time players for you at the collegiate level.
Yeah, and then Oklahoma put out an offer to Putnam City West athlete DJ Ackerson, 6 foot, he played corner as well as wide receiver, and he's pretty athletic. I went and looked at some of the film on him and watched when I saw him get his offer while he was there at the junior day, which is always exciting to see the kids get their offer. You see them smiling, and you can tell that they're just like beaming from ear to ear. It's the offer that I've been wanting. Kind of like you mentioned last segment about Bo Bentley. He's a huge Oklahoma fan, Baker Mayfield's favorite player, which shout out to Baker. He's influenced so many of these young players just with his moxie and his attitude. Got so many wanting to be him. And I appreciate that because that attracts them to wanting to check out a program like Oklahoma. Even as a blue blood, you still got to find ways to bring players in when you're not doing all the cool jersey stuff like some of the other programs are. But just focusing on that OK Prep agenda, to me, is just huge. It shows that they truly have the dedication, and they didn't lie and give lip service coming in. Brent Venables said he wanted to prioritize the state, and they're doing that. So like you said, you don't want to see another Norman North kid go somewhere else and dominate. You want to make sure you can catch him early. And because they're spending time on these campuses, going up to Owasso, going up to Booker T, in Tulsa, spending time at the local schools and trying to attract that talent, that means that they really care, and they're really trying to find a way to really develop the local guys here. So pretty excited to see that.
Yeah, and don't sleep on DJ Ackerson. He might not be rated just yet, but you've already got Oklahoma State going after him. You got Boston College coming out of nowhere, trying to pull him out of the state, and then Nevada. He's got an offer from them as well. So, 4 offers so far on the table: Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Nevada, and BC. I imagine that offer sheet will continue to pick up. I mean, Oklahoma is going to recruit well, and they're going to continue to recruit in a way that may or may not make sense to everybody because they're going to trust their evaluations. They're going to trust their instincts on players, and they're going to be continuing to look for the right kind of guys in the process. It's not just going to be about the star rating. Does that matter? It can matter, but it's not the only thing. There's going to be more to it than just what rating a guy has, what school he comes from, what state he comes from. We know that they're going to recruit nationally, but it is nice to see them continuing to put an emphasis on Oklahoma kids. Anybody else that you want to touch on and talk about before we get out of here, Jay?
I think one player, though, that we're going to have to definitely break down a lot more is going to be the big Swedish kid, Valdin Sone.
Yep.
He's out over at PP. He's a PPI recruits, plays ball in Virginia. And like I said, he's Swedish, 6'5", and he's a legitimate 320 pounds, and he looks like it. His coach, Brandon Collier, he's one of the guys over at PPI, and he does in recruits, and he he keeps up with all the international players. I think Daniel Akinkunmi kind of came through him as well. And yeah, seeing Vladin walk by BV, stand next to him, stand next to Bates, I'm like, okay, he's a ginormous human being.
Huge.
Just the videos had me in awe. I'm like, okay, we need to find a way. I don't care. Find a way to win this kid's services, because at his size and being naturally 6'5", over 300 pounds, day one coming on the campus, oof. He's going to find a quick path, and he's got some quick moves. He's strong. He runs through people. He has a no mercy mentality where he tries to push people around, John. This is one of the players you need to get. You need to get guys like that, because you don't need him to be a 5-star. You just need him to be really, really good and active the way that he is. He can turn out to be something special long term.
So people are going to maybe scoff at the Swedish thing, but I'm going to run down the offer sheet just real quick. Alabama, Auburn, Florida, Florida State, Georgia, Kentucky, LSU. That's all so far a bunch of SEC schools, Florida State, and then Miami, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Penn State, South Carolina, Texas A&M. That should tell you everything you need to know about this kid.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. All those SEC schools, all the schools that are known for having trenches like Penn State, Nebraska. Yeah, Syracuse, who, they've been doing a really good job of getting trench players ever since they got Nick Williams up there with Fran Brown. Yeah, all the trench gamers, they're after this kid. And, of course, Virginia, the local state school, is going to go after him. Just waiting for Vitek to give him an offer. Mm-hmm. But the kid is the big ticket. He's going to be something special. And if you get him here, which I heard that we have a very good chance now based upon how the visit went, you may have put yourself ahead of pace over the next couple of years, because he's definitely going to be someone that could potentially be a 3-year starter.
Yeah. Now, this is going to be one of those recruitments that will likely go down to the wire, because you just can't find dudes that are already well over 300 pounds that can play defensive tackle and be very, very productive at the position. Those are rare breeds. And we know, we've seen it, right? We've seen the defensive tackle recruitment play out over the last several years, dating back to DJ Hicks, and then through the 2024 cycle, whether it was David Stone and Jaden Jackson or Floyd Bucard, like name a defensive tackle that Oklahoma was in on, and how much of a dramatic recruitment it was, whether they won it or lost it. It was just one that everybody was following because of how important those dudes are to a defense. So we'll talk about Valdin Sone this week at some point, dig deeper into his game.
Yep.
Let you know what we like, what we see his abilities potentially to be at the collegiate level. We'll do that. I also want to talk about my guy, Braden Rouse. This is a dude, a linebacker out of Georgia that I like that kid a lot. So we'll talk about him on a later show coming up this week here on Locked On Sooners. But again, thanks so much for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. Shout out to all the everydayers out there. Tune in, subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. We're free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. Follow Jay at Unfair Sports. Go check out his channel, Unfair Sports, on YouTube. You can follow me at John9Williams. You can read my work covering the Sooners over at SoonersWire.com. The show is at Locked On Sooners on all the social media platforms that you like to frequent the most. Make sure you go hit the follow button wherever you do see us, so you can see all of our great content that we're putting out there. But until next time, he's Jay. I'm John. We'll talk to you then. Boomer.
Sooner.